Bonjour à tous. This is my 5 month or approximately 150-day progress video of my studies in French. So let's get right to it. It shouldn't be a long video because it's more of the same. But an update on my stats. How many cards do I totally have? 4,894, which is close to 5,000, which is, I guess, a landmark. Doesn't seem like much of a milestone to me, but it's a thing. How many notes do I have, which is my approximation of how many words I know in French in terms of at least some kind of context that I'm aware of it. Again, with all the caveats I mentioned previously, around 2,800, which is cool, I guess. But what's interesting is I've always assumed that the 3,000 mark was that was it. That was the real milestone. Once I hit 3,000 words, it's all clear sailings from here. I'll be able to speak well, I'll be able to read easily, it'll be all good. Well, I'm only 181 words away. Somehow I don't think classic French literature will be super easy at that point. But, and honestly, over the course of 30 days, I don't really feel much progress in terms of, I don't feel any stronger in French by any stretch of the imagination. But the statistics show that I've learned more. So I don't know. Someone wrote an article saying that 4,000 words or 4,000 root words that's a good sign that that's like B2 level amount of vocabulary. Now, again, this 2,800 words, that's not all root words. A lot of those are conjugations, but there's not that many conjugations. Like, there's not that many repeated words in that. So, like, maybe the most common might have two, three, or four, perhaps, notes at the most, but honestly, not that many. So, the vast majority are verbs or nouns or adjectives or adverbs that show up once. Um, so, on the other hand, when you look at the mature, I only have 4,138 cards mature, which if I cut in half, because that's how notes tend to work, that would be only 2,070 approximately words, which is well short of 2,800. So if I just kind of subtracted all my learned cards, I really only have around 2,100 words that represent the words I really know well, mature. And you know what? I guess that's probably a pretty reasonable way to describe how many words I know. And yeah, that feels about right, actually. Am I two-thirds the way through 3,000, which was supposed to be that big point where I feel like I jumpstart and I really know French at that point? You know what? Yeah, I think that's about reasonable. I feel about two-thirds of the way there. And now that doesn't mean that I'm an expert when I have 3,000 words, but it's more just you kind of get past that point where you're past the point of no return at that point, where you know enough French that you just got to keep on doing what you're doing, keep on reading, watching, listening, and doing reviews, and things will start to hopefully exponentially get faster in terms of improvement. Again, maybe that's optimistic thinking, so take that with a grain of salt. Just a quick update on my stats. Mature rate for the month was 95%, which is fine. It's like slightly down, but whatever. My learning percentage is slightly down for whatever reason. The sentences, I guess, were a little bit harder, but again, nothing particularly atypical. And if you actually look at my overall percentage global, it's exactly the same as it always is. Around 96%, around 97, and around 91 to 92% for the learning one. So statistics exactly the same. Even though it feels like one of these days Anki's going to stop working for me, that I'm just going to start forgetting all these words and all these sentences that I've memorized. But so far, it has not stopped working. I haven't hit a week where it's like I just don't remember everything, and I have 400 reviews because I keep on forgetting these sentences or these words. That hasn't happened, and yeah, so there's not really much to say about that. A quick update. Again, sometimes Anki messes up when it feels like I added cards, but again, 210 cards every week, 107 hours of study in total, which is cool. Plus probably about well, let's see, 4, 8, 12, 16, probably another 30 hours or so of flashcard creation. So in terms of actual study time, let's round up and be generous, 150 hours, which is not that much actually when you think about it. 150 hours of study. Now, there's also reading practice that I've done, which honestly is not that much. So, we could probably add another 20 hours maybe of reading maximum. Like maybe I'm underestimating, maybe I'm overestimating, but let's be conservative and say an extra 20 hours of reading, so 170 hours, and then TV, well, let's say 50 hours. So I've really only studied French for 220 hours, which is not a terrible amount of time. The FSI estimation, it takes about 600 hours to become fluent in French, or at least work competent. So if my goal was to learn French within a year to be work competent, I'm about halfway there. Again, people argue that the FSI estimate doesn't include outside studying, but they also don't use spaced repetition, which is much more efficient than traditional study methods. And from everything I've read, 600 hours is a nice, good amount that if you're studying well and you're immersing and you're reading and you're learning vocabulary and working really hard, 600 hours is about right. That's about how long it takes typically for people. So I'm a third of the way there, I guess. um, Again, reviews are slowly creeping up in terms of amount because my amount of mature cards are increasing. And I guess this week I studied slightly less than I normally do, but again, as you can see over time, the amount of studying I have to do every week has increased from there was a while where it was only about 4.5 hours to 5 hours, and now it's around about 6. So I study about 45 minutes to an hour every day, generally closer to an hour. And then there are some brutal days that are about 70 to 80 minutes. Those days were not fun. Yeah. And yeah, I like how this chart is starting to become a bell curve a little bit, but other than that, there's not really much to say. So my average day was 12.7 seconds per card, which again is way too long, but I've had worse days. And my average per card, I think total, is 11.5, which is 5.2 cards a minute. So again, it's not that fast. I think people recommend you should keep it under 10 seconds, but it is what it is. Some of these sentences are a bit of a drag. All right, jumping to my frequency list. So currently, I'm very close to finishing the first 1,000 words of French. So I've been using the Routledge Frequency Dictionary, and currently I am on number 873. Again, I know a lot more than 873 words, but I'm just going through the top 1,000, learning every sentence where I don't know the word. So confier, I don't know that word. It means to entrust. So my next week I will learn Je te confie ce garçon, rends-moi un homme. So I'll learn that sentence, which is a kind of a cool sentence. It's a little interesting, so that'll be fun. So I've started to notice some problems with my method. And so let's quickly talk about my method again. So let's take this sentence, Je te confie ce garçon. So I'm learning the word confie, which is a conjugation of to entrust. So how would I memorize that word? I would have two cards. One that says Je te, and then blank, ce garçon. Then I would have to say Je te confie ce garçon. And then I would have another card that just says confie, and I would have to supply a sentence that uses that word. So Je te confie ce garçon is what I would have to say if I saw confie. In addition, I would also have another set of cards. So one that just says Je te confie, and then in brackets it would say l'infinitive. So I would have to say what actually is the infinitive version of that verb. That just kind of creates a stronger link between the specific conjugation and the infinitive. I think that's actually pretty useful. So it helps me guess the meaning of words. Like so, even if I've never seen that conjugation before, I can guess what it means and what potential tense it might be. So to have that stronger link, I think, is actually pretty valuable. So I would have a je te confie l'infinitive, ce garçon, and I would have to say confier. And I would also have just the word confier, and I would have to supply a sentence with some kind of conjugation of confie. And if I have multiple sentences with that infinitive verb, I could choose whatever I want, or the particular one I'm trying to learn, je te confie ce garçon. Now, the problem with this approach is that the more words I learn, it's a good problem to have, but the more words I learn, the less often a sentence will have multiple words I don't know. And that sounds like a good thing, but what I realize is that it's quite a mental burden to memorize a sentence because you have to actually mentally imagine what the sentence is saying without, not in terms of English, but just kind of the general meaning, the mentalese, the imagery, or the general, just generic, abstract meaning of the sentence. And then to keep all the French words in order as well, and to also memorize the sound and how to say it and stuff. Je te confie ce garçon. So that takes a certain amount of mental energy, and especially if it's kind of a weird sentence, or it has kind of unfamiliar tenses, or maybe you barely, even with an English translation, barely understand what it's trying to say, those sentences can be quite tough to memorize, especially if it's quite long and there's only literally one word you have to memorize in it. And so that's quite a mental burden, and I'm not sure what the solution is here. I guess just be more accepting of the fact that sometimes I'll have to supply an additional or different sentence that uses that word. So if I had a really long sentence like with confier, uh, je te confie ce garçon, that's not that long, so that'll be easy to memorize. But if I had a long one, like look at the next one, ils ont fait remarquer que ces jeunes avaient été pris. So actually, that's not a very good example because I don't think I might have a flashcard for Ave, but I definitely have one for pris, été, jeune, sais que, I don't have one for remarquer, but I do for ils ont fait. So how many flashcards would that generate? One, two, three, four, I guess, five, I guess would be the maximum, which again is not too bad. That's five cards as opposed to just two. So again, at the beginning of studying, when you have 6 or 7 words in a sentence that you don't know, you don't even have to put any effort into memorizing the sentence because just from reviewing those different words and all those different variations, it's no effort to actually memorize. But when it's a longer sentence with all words you know except for one, it is quite a mental burden. That being said, though, the more I think about it, you're putting in that mental burden to get this whole sentence in your brain, and all that does is, I guess, just solidify the word, I suppose. But I'm not sure. It, it's something I'll have to think about. I think just the solution is to, as I learn more, just be more accepting that I can supply a sentence that's not necessarily the one that the word came from. And I just have to be careful that it's actual French and not some kind of made up French that I decided is true. But so that's my situation. So like I said before, 874, which means if I go to my actual frequency list of the words that I kind of curated to reduce the amount of time the amount of time to figure out what's my next word to learn. From all the words that are not crossed off, I think I have about 86 left, which means that's about 2 weeks worth of words because I can learn about 105 words a week. But the problem is like often most sentences will have at least 2 or 3 words that I don't know, and then so that takes some time as well. So on average, I've been averaging about 30 to 40 new words from this list a week, with the rest being incidental from the sentence. But again, kind of like going back to that problem I had, more and more the sentence will just have the one word. So in a way, I'm getting through the list faster, but it just means more and more sentences I have to memorize. So which is good and bad for that. And it takes a little bit longer. Like it takes if you have a sentence with 10 words that you don't know. So for example, let's say you don't know any of these words, it takes there's a fixed amount of time to get the sentence into Anki, to choose some pictures for the entire sentence and stuff. But then once you do that, the additional amount of time to start making cards for each individual word. So let's say you do 2 cards for il, another 2 for on, and then fait, and then remarquer, and so on. So how many? 3, 6, 9, 10. So there's could be potentially 20 to 22 flashcards, or maybe even more, 24 maybe even if we're going through all the conjugations for this one sentence. So you can produce a lot of flashcards with this one sentence in a relatively short period of time if you had to memorize every single word. But if you only have to memorize literally remarquer, that would produce only 2. So you have still that fixed time of getting the sentence into Anki and choosing some pictures, which takes a bit of time, which is annoying, about a minute or so. Uh, when you have only one sentence per word, it does seem to take a little bit longer to make flashcards, which is pretty annoying. But yeah, so 84 cards, 86 cards around there. That's how many words I need to know. Sorry, 86 words I need to learn. And then I'll be at 1,000. What is the 1,000th word in French in terms of most common according to this particular corpus? Is, drumroll, professionnel, which is professional. It's kind of annoying to memorize French words that are cognates, but I think it is important just to get them kind of in my brain and floating around. So what am I going to do after this? I think I've already mentioned in previous videos, but I think my goal after I hit 1,000, I'm not going to stick with just this list. I may, come back to it at one point, but I think what I'm going to do is start sentence mining Le Petit Prince. Hope that's pronounced right. Prince. Le Petit Prince. Because I want to get a lot more literary vocabulary into my brain. Purely frequency has been really beneficial both for listening comprehension and reading comprehension because so many of these words show up all the time. But a lot of them are like very like government related because of the corpus. Like a lot of the news came from stories about government stuff, like budgets and laws and governments and raising taxes and things like that. So you get a lot of words like that in this first thousand, which is good because when you read news articles, it makes it a lot easier. But reading news articles is not my primary reason for learning French, other than basic conversational ability. I want to be able to read novels, and so I think the Petit Prince is only 2,000 unique words, which means that of those unique words, I'm sure I know, I don't know exactly how many, maybe 1,500, maybe 1,200, maybe 1,000. I'm not really sure, but quite a lot. So the amount of time it'll take me to actually sentence my the entire novel, I actually don't think it'll be that long. Maybe the first few chapters might take a bit of time, but the more words I learn, there'll be less and less words I'll have to learn throughout the whole thing. So it shouldn't actually take me crazy long, maybe about 2 or 3 months maybe to go through the whole thing, which now that I say that out loud seems like a lot, but maybe that's an exaggeration of how long it'll take. But I think I'll be good because I just need, like I said, my problem has always been in language learning vocabulary. The fact that I just don't know enough words. I'll read a novel, and there's so many of words that I've just never seen before. Yes, grammar sometimes is a problem because I'm not sure, is this conditional, is this future, or it might be an idiomatic expression or a particular syntax thing or irregular use of prepositions, which is annoying. When to use a versus on versus don versus o versus etc. All those things. It's confusing, but rarely, very rarely is that ever the issue. It's almost always the problem of not knowing the words, that I don't know that particular noun or that verb or that adjective or that adverb. Like if you know what the words are, figuring out the grammar is not that hard. It's like work, but if you know the nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs of a sentence, even if you don't actually really understand the grammar that much, you will understand the sentence more or less. Like if you just say me hungry now get food, it's not grammatical, but you'll understand the sentence. Or even if you got rid of adjectives, food, me, inside, now, you basically know that I say that I'm hungry as well. So even if the grammar is totally like you don't really 100% get the grammar, if you know all the words, the meaning becomes relatively clear, and then you'll absorb the grammar eventually. So, long story short, yeah, the vocabulary is just the problem that I can only learn about 110 words a week. I don't think there's no way I can learn more than that because I'm already studying about an hour a day on Anki, and that's not going to slow down anytime soon because as more and more cards become mature, I'm going to have to review those as well. So, other than just abandoning Anki and just reading more, I guess I could do that, but I think I'm getting too much benefit from the efficiency of Anki to abandon it at this point. Maybe after like a year, once I've hit the year point and I have about 5 or 6 thousand words under my belt, then that's the point where I have to consider maybe it's just worth it. Just stop reviewing Anki and just read an extra hour a day. Probably, but I think I'll have to reevaluate once I work my way through the Le Petit Prince. So that's my goal. I think that will be very useful, and like I said, I don't think there's actually that. Now that when I read the book, it's always like there's these key verbs or key nouns that I just don't know, and then but most of the words I actually do know in Le Petit Prince because I've read about half of it at this point. I haven't read the whole thing, so I'm just gonna go through it. Yeah, I'm just gonna start. I'm just gonna once I hit 1,000, that's good enough in terms of pure frequency because after 1,000, the usefulness of the frequency dictionary just tails off and becomes less and less useful because the first 1,000 covers 75%, 70%, imagine around that of the English of the French language, and then the next 1,000 covers about 10 to 15% more, and then a few percentage more, and it just exponentially tails off. And so, yes, would I get benefit from the next 1,000? I would, but I think it'll be more fun and more relevant to my interest to sentence mine Le Petit Prince. I decided to go with that instead of Harry Potter just because of the sheer length. I want the satisfaction of finishing that entire novel and knowing every single word in it. And because it's kind of shorter, I think that'll be a nice little victory. Because if I chose Harry Potter, well, there's 6,000 unique words in the book, and I only know 3,000 right now, so I don't want to have to spend 6 months with Harry Potter before I've accomplished my goal. So, of course, I want to eventually go back maybe and sentence mine it, but at this point, I think it's more important to have these little accomplishments, like completely sentence mining a short story or news article or a novel, and just get more literary vocabulary. Really get all those passé simple conjugations down, especially the irregular ones, because honestly, passé simple is not hard. It's just there's some irregular ones, and it's just a little strange. It looks a little different than the other normal the indicative tenses or the standard ones than regular speech. So that's my plan. Oh, also just last thing, update. I had my first couple italki sessions, my first two conversations in French actually, and they were a lot of fun actually. I learned a lot, although it really makes you feel like you learned absolutely nothing over 5 months. But on the other hand, I could understand every single thing the tutor could say, the tutor was saying. Now, to play devil's advocate, because they know I'm a student, they're going to talk in a more comprehensible way compared to someone who's just talking to their friend, which is why I can understand every single thing my tutor was saying, while it's still hard to understand, say, an interview in French or a TV show, that it's still challenging. So, that being said, though, I understood everything they were saying, and I could say some sentences back, and I made a lot of mistakes, but I could still communicate what I wanted, more or less. And so that's a victory after, I mean, it's only 2 hours of talking practice, so that's nothing in the grand scheme of things. But, at the end of the day, talking practice is only about pulling out the input that's already inside you and producing the language that way. So, I don't think I need to spend that much more than maybe once a session, maybe every couple of weeks is probably my plan from here on out. Just to kind of, again, trying to solidify the language, crystallize it, and try and produce the language that's already inside me from all the reading and listening and studying that I've done. So, like I said, I did improve after the second conversation more, after quite a bit more than the first. But at the same time, you feel like a baby, you feel like an idiot because you can't say anything very well, or you make all these mistakes. So, and there's all this vocabulary that you don't know. You want to say something about yourself, but you just don't know the word for pasta or for pastry or something like that. So it's very so I learned a lot, but it's very discouraging at the same time. It's just like picking up a novel for the first time and trying to read it. It's incredibly frustrating until you spend a few hours doing it, and then it becomes a lot easier. So anyways, that's to quick recap. That's 150 days of studying French. And when I hit the six month mark, I plan to actually do a quick review, maybe not quick review, but a thorough review, I think, of the Fluent Forever methodology, the obvious benefits, because I've experienced a lot of benefits, but I think a lot of the, let's call them omissions. They're not necessarily errors of the method, but I think omissions, because I think the method de-emphasizes things that I think should be emphasized more often when discussing the Fluent Forever method, the flashcards, Anki, and the role of immersion and other things in the learning process, which not necessarily haven't been mentioned by, say, the novel or the method or the book or by Gabriel Weiner, but it's just, I think more emphasis needs to be put on that, especially for those who have been studying for 5 months or 6 months. The book becomes a lot less relevant because there's less emphasis on that later stuff. But anyways, I'll talk about that more after the 6 month mark, where I feel like 6 months is a very good round number, round amount of time to give an honest assessment of the method of whether it's been effective for me or not. Okay? Anyways, that's been my update of my French language journey for the last 5 months. You can go back to my previous videos to see how I've progressed over that time, how my views have changed, which they have a little bit, and overall just how much I've improved. Anyways, have a good day and see you in a month. Goodbye.